Welcome to The People I Play With. This is the show where I interview, well, the people I play with. I'm your host, Jesse Bernico. Today's guest is Sarah Kouklis. Sarah and I have actually met fairly recently through our work. How are you doing today, Sarah?
I am doing just fine. Had a busy day at work, but I also was working from home today, so I got to make croissants.
Oh, that sounds lovely. So we played this game of Crash Pandas, which is about raccoons getting involved in the fast-paced world of street racing. But before we get into the specifics of that game, I want to talk a little bit about you as an RPG person in general. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think your actual strong suit is? What does Sarah bring to the table?
That is a great question. I think my strong suit as a DM specifically, or a GM, depending on the game, of course, I think would come into my focus on the player experience. I am a big proponent of when it comes to like the stories that I create or the worlds that I build for the players to play in, whether it's a module that's pre-written or whether it's something that I'm creating. I do my best to basically throw out anything that doesn't bring the players joy. And even if that's something that I really, really love and I'm really, really excited about, I am here to kill my babies if it means a better experience for the players.
Oh, that's interesting. That actually ties into something that I kind of want to focus on with the Crash Pandas game a little bit. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that you have no problem taking sort of an editorial view over whatever material you're working with.
Yeah, definitely. There have been a couple of times that I've rerun the same one shot or the same story, and it comes out entirely differently because I add and remove things to better relate to the characters that the players want to play.
Okay, yeah, I definitely see what you're talking about. So another question I have, um, in terms of your play or your GMing, do you think there's anything that you could actually improve?
Oh, as a GM, absolutely. I am oftentimes a little too reliant on improving and making things up as I go. And I'm trying to be better about, especially in a long form campaign, I'm trying to be better about tracking what things I make up in the spot to better integrate them into the story. For example, a random NPC that needs to be added into a scene on a whim, making sure I actually take the time to write down their name and maybe a little tidbit about the player interaction, because I do find I tend to rely on my players' notes more than my own. And then every once in a while, there's been a couple of things that sort of get out of hand in terms of the players remember one thing one way, but then in prepping for a session, I remembered it a different way and then had to retcon one way or another to either match their expectations or change what happened in the past to match what I wrote.
I'm pretty sure I've had the experience of having an NPC just have 5 different names over the course of a
Yeah.
campaign because nobody could remember what they were called, and we just rename them every time.
Yep.
So, so I understand that. Well, turning our attention to the actual Crash Pandas game, I have to admit that this kind of game isn't typically something I would jump at. However, there were a few things you did as the game master that really drew me into this otherwise incredibly silly premise. Specifically, you framed the first part of the game as a kind of heist. We had to steal this engine our car needed, and you pulled out this little map and showed us where the engine was, and you handed us some extra dice and told us, to position ourselves on it. It was kind of at that moment that the game kind of became real for me. It was like, oh no, we really are going to do this. And I was suddenly very, very engaged. So I have to ask, how did you arrive at all of that?
Man, that is again a great question. So the I believe, if I remember correctly, the Crash Pandas does have an element of heist to it as written. It is just a one-page RPG, so it's not like there's a lot to go on, but there is some references to heist, and it felt like a really good way to tie in Like, why would you be street racing? What other kinds of things kind of go hand in hand with street racing? And so I think it really was an opportunity for a group of players who had never played this game before and had never played a game with each other before. It gave them, you all, an opportunity to sort of get to know each other as players and also get to know your characters a little bit better, but without necessarily having too much in terms of the hard car racing rules that are part of the Crash Pandas game. It also was a great way to just let hijinks happen because I feel like heists and hijinks in games, especially, just go hand in hand.
Interesting. To give the listeners a bit of context, this game was actually played at work as part of a general, like, let's all have the people in the company play games together. And I'm actually almost hearing a little bit of that focus in your approach, in that, I'm going to have a bunch of people who maybe don't know each other that well. It almost sounds like a little bit of like a team building exercise you kind of had in your
Absolutely,
mind.
yeah. I definitely think that of anything at our work to get people to do team building, it would be playing a silly game like this.
That's really interesting because I had not considered that social context when it came to that, which is one of the reasons why I was asking you about this, because again, the minute you had that little map, I was like, oh, like, this is important. So that kind of brings us to the second half of the game, um, in which we actually did the street racing part, and the rules are pretty clear about how to handle the car the raccoons are driving, but they're pretty vague about how to handle what's going on with any of the other cars involved in the race. And at one point, you kind of mentioned that you had created these little personality profiles for each of the other cars, and that's another really great idea that's sort of beyond what's implied by the game itself. So again, I kind of have to ask you, how did you develop that particular idea?
It all sort of ties back to me wanting to draw the players into the world and give them a reason to, like, why are you racing here? Why do you care? I've been a part of games in which I had no reason that my character cared about the events that were happening, and it made it really hard for me as a player to get into the gameplay. It just felt like I was going through the motions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I could have set you guys up at a race line and said, okay, there's two other cars besides you. It's not anybody you recognize. Ready, set, go. And the question then is, then why am I here? And so when it came to creating the race, giving people, giving the other characters, giving the NPCs even the tiniest hint of a personality, it gives the players a reason to care about what's going on. It's building even just a slight bit more of that sort of world that you're in.
Yeah, and I know that there was obviously one particular car, and again, this almost ties into the next thing I'm going to ask you. One particular car that had a lot of like relevance to the player characters as we had set them up. I'm almost therefore kind of more curious about the other cars, because there were two or three other ones, and I'm curious as to like what your formulation for those other cars on the track was like.
Honestly, a lot of my creation of NPCs and content in any game that I run is just relating it back to something either in real life or something that I found. It's very much that sense of what are some other ideas of things that exist in real life that are fun and silly or fit the vibe. And if I can't think of anything there, I'll just go poking around online at other people's experiences and what they've run. And oftentimes it's some amalgamation of real life and fictional content that I pull together to create these quirky characters that you end up interacting with.
Interesting. Was there any particular source of inspiration for these?
That is a great question. Okay, so for context, one of the other cars racing was a group of dads, and they were following all of the rules of the road. They were stopping at stop signs, they were making sure to use their indicator, and the idea of that kind of blossomed from a D&D podcast called Dungeons and Daddies that I am an avid fan of. Just the idea of dad stereotypes being set into these ridiculous, fantastical worlds is something that I think is extremely entertaining. And so the idea that there would be a group of dads who were part of this race and who were like trying to set an example for their kids of, well, it doesn't matter how what the prize is, you have to make sure to follow the rules of the road, was just something that to me was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. And depending on what happened with both the player's car and the other cars in the race, there was a chance that they could win. Like, if everything else got so chaotic, they could potentially have won that race just by driving carefully and following the rules.
Sure, because everybody else is, running through, store windows and ramming into walls and
Exactly.
possibly having their engines explode. It seems like in some cases you were definitely pulling from a sense of like kind of similar to the game premise itself, which is like raccoon street racing. You were like, careful, observant, dads driving in a street race.
Yep, yep, absolutely.
Okay. All right. I can see that. So as silly as the game was, I don't think it was devoid of earnestness. Many of the characters had a real stake in the race. My character had a lost love interest. Two of the other characters kind of had a falling out with their old driver. There was even another character that was sort of dealing with anger management issues, as metaphorized by rabies. So so none of those were like delved into like too deeply. But I think they were felt and they certainly colored everything. So given that material that we sort of provided for you, how did that feed into the rest of your decision making, either in terms of constructing the scenario or, especially in actual play there in the moment as we began to sort of enact these things?
Oh man. So in creating the scenario, that definitely just pulls back to what I said earlier about building a story that relates to the characters. Was, as soon as you sent me a character who had a lost love interest, I was like, great, she's gonna be dating the rival. Easy, done, check. And then someone else had, their rival was easy to pull in, and that became the rival who was dating your lost love interest. It's like, dude, boom, check, check. They're both handled. They now have an investment in the story. They have a reason to fight for this win. And then in terms of once we got playing, that is where I just let the players shine. Um, I don't know how in depth people are going to go with their characters, especially when it's the first time that I have played with anyone. And so letting people just sort of have free reign of whatever their characters would potentially do in a situation, I find nets the best results for everyone. Because if you trust a player to do what they truly believe their character would do in a situation, and you figure out a way that that could potentially work within the confines of the game to a degree. And so once I can get an idea of how people want to play their characters, it usually gives me a reason to create particular NPCs or particular things within the situation that maybe I hadn't accounted for ahead of time. I can play off of whatever the players are putting forward. For example, we had the like unpaid intern who was just getting absolutely obliterated. But one of the people who was sitting at our table was an intern a couple years ago. And so for me, it was like a very fun thing to have a little nod to like, hey, you were an intern, and aren't you glad your internship wasn't like this? Just
Yeah,
something silly like that.
I see. Interesting. Was there any particular moment when we were sort of bringing these different aspects of our characters to life that sort of either inspired you or surprised you or kind of threw you and maybe put you on your back foot as a GM a little bit? Like, were there any little moments like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think when the party sort of split in the heist attempt, where a couple people went up through the vents and then some people just sort of barreled headfirst down a hallway, it's always a balance when a party splits of making sure both groups have a chance to attempt whatever they're trying to do. because this game was people playing, in some situations rabid, in some situations very refined French, but in all situations wild raccoon characters, that entire heist scene was much more of me feeling like I was kind of juggling things than normal. This is a one shot, so the results don't really matter. And these people are playing raccoons, so chaos makes sense. So this was at least a situation in which leaning into that chaos and letting things get a little bit wacky worked. But handling that whole sort of spur of the moment, oh, we're gonna go up this way, and then I'm gonna bite his ankle, and then I'm gonna do this. Like that was a lot of like, okay, oh Lord, what's happening?
When you have, this meeting of this weird fiction with this sort of light system that's still going to give you outcomes, it's still going to say, did that work, did it not work? um there's a lot of there's a sort of bouncy quality to the events. It sounds like from your perspective you were playing a little bit of catch up to try and keep up with where the ball was going.
Absolutely. I was also very grateful that we were playing with a group of people who there were a couple of times throughout the game that somebody wanted to do something and I looked at them and I said, there is no precedence for what you're asking in our one page of rule set. So I'm going to make up a rule right now and this is what we're going to go with. And everyone just said, okay. And that level of trust in any RPG group is fantastic to just have players who say, I trust you to make a rule that is as fair as it can be in the moment.
Well, that's actually something, because the whole thrust of this interview, in case you haven't noticed, is me focusing on things where I felt like you already had gone above and aboard the text, the map for the heist, the personalities for the drivers, the meaningful content, as much as there is in a silly raccoon game. Um, that other quality, I'm gonna bring up an observation, and then I want you to tell me whether or not I'm on the mark, which is that some GMs, when they go beyond the game's text, they're doing it to create control, usually to constrain or rein things in or bring things back on track. But everything that you did that I felt went above and beyond the rules text was almost the opposite. It was only ever for clarity, like, hey, I'm putting this map on the thing so we kind of know where people are and like what's going on. Or in the case of stuff like, I'm just going to roll a d20 and of above 12 you get what you want. To me, that's actually abdication of control. And I don't know, I think that's part of what made it work, because it's like at the end of the day, we were in a moment of uncertainty and you used an uncertain mechanism to resolve it, rather than something that felt like you were trying to like grab control of the chaos. It just added to the chaos.
Yeah, I I definitely am a proud chaos goblin when it comes to running games. And so I definitely having some amount of a rule set is obviously helpful because when somebody says I am gonna roll a d20 and no matter what I get, I'm doing this thing. It's like, well, that's not how the rules work. However, when people want to do something that is out of the norm or that I just on a gut check, I'm like, I don't know what the result of this would be. This these games are all built on the roll of the dice. So when in doubt, that is what I lean on is, you know what? I don't know what the answer is here. I'm not going to pick it. We are all trusting of the dice here, so we're going to roll a dice and see what happens.
Yes, I definitely saw your willingness to just be like, I don't know, I'm gonna roll a die here.
Yeah.
Um, which again, to me, I don't know, I found that more engaging, not less. If that makes any
Good.
sense.
I'm
Yeah,
glad. That's
yeah,
that's always the goal. I feel like there is a degree of had I just said, no, that's not what happens. This is what happens. Is it takes away the amount of agency that a player has for me to just make that choice. However, by me leaving the choice up to the dice, we all kind of come to the table with an agreement of every choice that we make in this game is going to depend on a dice roll. So if I can put that responsibility onto the roll of a die, it is just consistent with the rest of how we're playing the game.
yeah. I really appreciated that aspect of what we were doing in that game. So I've been sitting here asking you these very hard questions. Um, do you have anything you want to ask me about the game we played?
I do, because I have not played Crash Pandas as a player. I would love to know, what was your approach to making a character in such a sort of wacky world and with a system that had very, very little to offer in terms of support in character creation?
That is an interesting question. I'll put it this way: I am incapable of playing a character that does not have something real and relatable going on. So my fallback in this case is sort of like what you kind of see in like a Pixar movie or something like that. Because the thrust of every animated movie, no matter how silly the premise, is that the characters always still have something that we go, yeah, I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
Or I know a guy who went through exactly that. Like there can be as much silliness around all of that at once, but at the end of the day, the thing that is keeping us engaged with what is going on is something grounded and relatable and real. Um, so when I looked at the instructions in the text, that did say you should sort of have like a conflict of some kind. Um, Admittedly, it's a little lazy on my part because I use this a lot when I build characters. Was the lost love interest? When I don't know what else to do with a character, I'm like, I guess he's in love with somebody who doesn't love him back.
I feel
It's
like it's a great one to fall back on.
yeah. So yeah, I mean it was basically about that. It was about saying what can I bring to this silly premise that one isn't going to overwhelm the premise because I know we're not going to like do 4 hours of me moping around, but also at least is going to give the character something relatable that isn't just equally as oddball as the premise itself.
Kind of love that. It's nice to hear that, regardless of whether it's something that is just used to fall back on or not, like having something that anyone could relate to, and a story that we all sort of understand to some degree, is, you're absolutely right. It is very engaging. It does, I feel very similar to how I keep talking about like making sure the story is engaging for the players. Like you're making sure that your character is engaging for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. 'Cause so to begin to kind of wrap up a little bit, I want to ask you, not necessarily just from the Crash Pandas game, but it can come from that if that's your answer. Do you have a favorite recent game memory?
Ooh, ooh, good question. And yes, I have a new group of people that I have been we've been playtesting more RPGs, and we played a game of Wonder Home. And I walked away from that game so excited to use it to support other RPGs I play in the future. The reason why it sort of sat and has lasted with me is that that game is such an incredible opportunity for group world building, because the only mechanic that exists is that when you as a player do something that is good for somebody else, or do something that on your character sheet says that it allows you to, you get a little token from your GM. And then at times that you feel it is opportune, you can spend your tokens to create a thing in the world, and it just happens. So, for example, we were in this little town and we needed to find somebody to ask them a question about something. And I spent a token to have there be some sort of a tavern that we could walk into and talk to someone who would know the right information. And it was just boom, there's a tavern now. And I could definitely see it as a way to, almost as like zero sessions, I will say multiple, like leading up to a homebrew campaign. If you were, I'm planning on doing this for my next sort of long form homebrew game, is to basically run a zero session for each of the towns that the players say that they want to come from. And it's sort of like before the start of the events, sometime in their life, and we play a session in the Wonder Home style to help create their hometown.
Oh, that is a very interesting idea. There are a lot of games and a lot of game ideas out there. Is there a game or even a game idea that you've never gotten a chance to play or even GM that you really want to?
Ooh, yes. I feel like I have finally found a group of people who have a similar playstyle from what I like to do and who are committed to showing up regularly.
Yeah. Do you have a like a core idea behind that campaign that you want to explore?
I do. And the basis of it is a world in which gods walk among us on the earth. And so there's a city of gods that like they maybe think that they're generally better than people and above people, but I really love the idea of how would the world have been built if there's a city in the middle of a continent that is specifically for the gods? What are the towns like that are just on the outskirts of that city versus what are the towns like that are very, very far from that city? How do people pray differently when they could be literally standing at a wall that their god might be standing on the other side of? And then additionally, what happens when one of the gods thinks that they have too much power within the material realm? Do the gods have too much power? What are they doing about it amongst themselves? And then how does that affect the rest of the mortal world?
That actually sounds really cool. I hope you get to run that because I certainly want to hear about it.
Thank you. It's definitely something that has been living in my head for a long time. I could talk about this like I could talk about my homebrew world for ages.
I I'm I'm sure we all could. Um, but either way, thank you very much for being one of the people I have played with, and for talking with me about that game today.
Yeah, thank you for taking a chance on an absolutely crazy premise. It was so fun and could have gone absolutely anywhere, and I'm very glad that our Crash Pandas game went the way that it did.
It was indeed a lot of fun. Thank you for listening to The People I Play With. Please join me in 2 weeks when I interview James Ritter about playing a replicant in Blade Runner.